Do you ever wake up in a cold sweat, fearing that Ukraine could end up sharing the fate of South Vietnam? That is to say, we could negotiate a peace, and it could seem to be a breakthrough, but in the end, Ukraine doesn't survive as an independent state in the same way that South Vietnam did not. Is that the nightmare?
Yeah, no, I don't have that nightmare at all, because Ukraine will survive. And the reason for that is because you look at the resiliency of the people. Look, I'll give you an example, and I actually put it on my phone, and it gives you, and I tell people, this kind of gives you an attitude of what this looks like going into the future. And there was a recent, it was put on TikTok or something, that the attacks had gone on. They were people, Ukrainian citizens were in the subway, and sitting in the subway, and they weren't huddled down, eating or drinking. You know what they were doing? They were singing their national anthem. You cannot replicate that. You can't. And that's the fighting heart of a country. That's not going to happen to Ukraine.
That is, it's troubling. This is the example you want to give. No, I know that's not going to happen to Ukraine. You know why? Because I saw a cool video, and I saw a really heartwarming moment that someone captured on video of the people in Kyiv where they were singing their national anthem. Okay, that's heartwarming. That's cool. I mean, the video was probably not, I think I've even seen it, or at least some version of it. And it does show some defiance. But you know what it doesn't show is the slaughter of the hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian men. It doesn't talk about the ones that are being stolen off the street, the guys that are fighting these recruiter or mobilizers, the ones that are sometimes even attacking and killing them and running and fleeing from their lives, trying to go out of the country, or that the ones that when they get to the front, they abandon the fight in large numbers, somewhere between 600-700 per day, abandon the fight on top of whatever's wounded, on top of a shrinking manpower pool. That's what he doesn't even talk about. You talk about this heartwarming moment, and you obliterate and blind everyone, to include apparently yourself, to the horrific cost of the Ukrainian people, because that counts too. And I assure you, there have been increasing numbers of actual protests in Ukraine. They haven't gone viral yet. They haven't continued. They haven't gotten too big yet. They're not being covered by the West, so you may not have seen any of that. But there have been some as recently as just 4 or 5 days ago. I haven't seen the news today. I don't know if they're continued on over the weekend, but toward the end of last week, they were definitely there, because people are tired of this. And when you look at the polls, the closer you get to the line of contact, the greater the percentage of Ukrainians who say, just get the war settled, because they don't want to have their people killed anymore. A lot of these people who were protesting are saying, don't just send our loved ones, our men, to certain death on the front line. That's the reason they're abandoning the fight. Those are the things that you need to be paying attention to, because the morale on the Russian side is sky high, and they have the industrial capacity to continue going down this path, etc. So that's what President Trump's envoy has been saying. Now let's look at what President Trump himself has said, and he focuses on something besides battlefield contingencies.
I want to stop the killing. So it just came out, or I think it came out, but I know for a fact, almost 8,000 young soldiers died this week between the two countries. A little bit more from Russia, but divided. You know, when you're the aggressor, you lose more. I don't know if you know that, but in war, when you're the aggressor, you tend to lose more. But it was a little bit more for Russia, but it was 8,000, a little bit more than 8,017 actually, died this week in that war. Why? And they're Russians. They're not American soldiers, but they're still human beings. They're souls. And I want to stop them. And you know, I stopped 7 wars. I thought this was going to be an easy one for me, but this has turned out to be tough. The hatred between Zelensky and Putin is unfathomable.
Do you still believe that they will talk? That they will have a...
I don't know. I think I'm going to have to do all the talking. They hate each other.
When do you think that will take place?
I don't know. Relatively soon.
Has any of the NATO...
We're going to get it worked out one way or the other, but relatively soon.
Has any of the NATO...
They hate each other so much, they can't breathe.
Yeah, they hate each other so much they can't breathe. The hatred is so palpable. I think it's probably accurate to say that is what Zelensky feels to Putin, but I don't think that much evidence exists to show that Putin has that antipathy towards Zelensky. I think it's contempt more than anything else. And he does not view him on an equal plane. Putin does not. of his counterpart in Ukraine. And he is much more focused on what the Western European leaders do, what Trump is going to do, et cetera. Those are the things that he pays attention to. And I mean, you see Putin all the time. He does not look like an angry man. I think that the most angry I've seen him is a couple of times, certainly at the beginning of the war when he announced his special military operation, as they call the war. He was pretty angry on that day there. And there was one other time, and I can't recall which time it was, but it was like a one-off because something had happened. The rest of the time, he's very methodical and matter of fact, and just says, this is what we're doing. We still want negotiations. We're still willing to end it as long as our terms are accepted. But if we don't, we're going to continue on. Okay, next question. You remember that when we showed from Beijing? That's kind of where he's at. There's not a lot of hatred there. There only is on the Ukraine side. And the compounding the problem for our side is that Trump is still saying, yeah, we're going to get it done, though. We're going to get this done. Probably the trilateral meeting will have to include me because they won't even talk to each other. Putin continues to say routinely, I'm willing to talk to Zelensky. Now, signing a deal with him is a separate matter because he's not legally the president of the country because he's gone past his term. And at least according to Putin's definition or an analysis of the Ukrainian constitution, it does indeed say that they can suspend the elections during a wartime when there's martial law, but it doesn't say anything about extending this term of the president. In fact, the only thing it does have apparently is the speaker of the Ukrainian Rada, their parliament, apparently would have the authority and would have the power to sign something and legally bind his country to, but that's a separate issue. But he said he's willing to talk to him. So there is one side that won't talk, and that's the Ukraine side. And I understand why he wouldn't, because the only way he's going to talk to Putin is Putin's going to tell him, there's no negotiation here. There's just my terms of surrender. And he's correct on that. Zelensky's not making that up. That is what would happen. Ergo, he's not going to talk to him. And then that kind of leads us to, where is this going? So you see Trump still saying he's going to get it done. Well, maybe he had in mind the day before he put out a Truth Social, which was kind of a bombshell. We talked about that on Saturday. And in this thing, he's basically given an ultimatum, even not to Russia so much as to NATO, where he says, I am ready to do major sanctions on Russia when all NATO nations have agreed and started to do the same thing. And when all NATO nations stop buying oil from Russia, as you know, NATO's commitment to win has been far less than 100%. And the purchase of Russian oil by some has been shocking. And it goes on from there. But basically, he's saying that, we have these big sanctions. We're ready to go and do all that. But first, you've got to come across. So we'll sanction China, India, Brazil, anyone who's buying Russian oil, anyone who's doing business with Russia, we'll sanction them as long as NATO does first. And so that means NATO first has to stop buying Russian oil. And that's between somewhere around 15%, depending on how you want to calculate it, of petroleum products that they still buy from Russia. And that has to stop first. And then they have to be willing to harm their own economies and tariff China and India and Brazil, et cetera. And they're not going to do that. And I think Trump knows that. And I don't know where his mind is about where he thinks this is going. If he set up these conditions that are nearly impossible for Europe to adopt and to go down, then the question is going to be, where are you going to go? Because your envoy didn't say anything about stopping this about $1 billion a month in arms sales, which your NATO ambassador said about a couple of weeks ago, that we're going to continue to sell weapons to NATO for the use of funneling on into Ukraine at a rate of about $1 billion a month. I don't know where that's coming from. Our industrial capacity is not enough to create that much new stuff. So it's going to have to continue to dwindle our supplies. We just can't keep up with it. I don't know. Maybe that's his plan, just to keep on making money with it. Because he's certainly not setting up any conditions that is going to bring the war to a resolution. Until you get both sides willing to say, we're willing to agree on these terms, the only thing left is the Russian side moving on with its military conquest. Let's see, just real quick there, I'm running out of a little bit of time here, but let me show you. Some in the United States, especially on Fox News, are not so convinced that sanctions are going to work and thinks maybe we need to go a different direction. Here is Dan Hoffman, who used to be, I think it was the CIA office, or he was in a Washington office in Moscow, station chief, so he does have some experience here of the Russians. Here's what he thinks.
You gave them ATACMS. The UK has long-range missiles. Germany has long-range missiles. We have them. Allow them to hit in Russia. And they hit the energy sector last night. It was the largest swarm of drones made by them in months. And it was effective. They're really affecting the energy inside Russia.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say that's the only way to deal with Russia's brutal onslaught. In fact, their press spokesman just yesterday said that there's going to be a pause in negotiations. That was according to Dmitry Peskov. And so we can talk all we want about sanctions, but that, going back to the days when President Biden said he thought that would deter Russia in the first place, I just don't think that's viable. But striking Russia inside Russian territory would be viable. And Germany needs to give Ukraine those long-range Taurus missiles so that Ukraine has the wherewithal to continue those strikes.
So, yeah, it's not going to be sanctions. Sanctions not going to work. I mean, he's right. He's right. Biden did try the sanctions. They had 18 rounds. They're working on the 19th round. Europe is right now. That's still not working. And then the question's got to be, then where are you going? Zelensky, I don't have time to play it right now, but Zelensky came out this weekend and he said, yeah, that's what we need, more sanctions. We need more arms, ammunition. Denmark has just in the last few days said that we're going to build a factory for long-range arms and fuel, rocket fuel for long-range weapons that Ukraine can then use to fire into Russia. Maria Zakharova, the spokesman for the foreign ministry in Russia, has warned that could escalate the war because they said this is the first time on NATO territory you are producing long-range components specifically for use to kill our people in our long-range cities. We're not just going to be passive at doing this, etc. And then Zelensky is continuing to use long-range fires into Russia. He says oil is the big thing there. That's what's really driving all this. And they want to harm Russia's oil infrastructure, their refining capacity, etc., to bring them to their knees and to bring them to the point to where they'll have a negotiated settlement on Ukraine's terms. Now, as I've told you, there's no such pain threshold on the Russian side that you can get to, whether militarily or economically. It's going to bring them to their knees against a smaller country that doesn't have the manpower, that doesn't have the industrial capacity that Russia has, and they can't fight a long-term attrition war without being ground to dust. I mean, again, it would be suicidal and foolish to the highest degree for Russia to do that, and illogical. Again, take the morality out of it. Take who you want to win. Those aren't even elements in this. The only thing that matters is what you can do and what you can't do. Our side cannot continue to go down the path that Hoffman is recommending, that Trump is trying to go down, that Kellogg is talking about, it, that Zelensky is actually doing. There's no path to success there, folks. There's not. All we're going to do is continue to make sure that the body count on the Ukraine side continues to stack up, that men continue to get stolen off the streets of Kyiv and other cities, maybe not so much in Kyiv because there's cameras there, but in other cities in the outlying areas where there aren't cameras, they're still getting stolen off the street every day. There's not enough of them. The Russians, according to the Ukraine's own commanding general, outnumbers them 3-1 across the board and up to 6-1 in some key areas of the battle. The battle on the front line does continue on. And by the way, Ukraine has had some success. It's striking Russia and some of their oil infrastructures. They have been advancing in their drone technology. They are very good in that. But there's two sides of that, too. Even Russia has just announced or has just released, and video has finally been shown out of the Garin 3, a jet-powered drone on the Russian side. This is a jet-powered drone right here. So this is their newest iteration, which has a bigger payload, and it can fly a lot faster and is much more difficult to shoot down. We'll see when those things start showing up in number. But even over this weekend, there was additional Russian shots, I think it was overnight actually, into the Ukrainian military facilities and their oil facilities and refinement capacities, et cetera. So they're hitting the same thing. So it is a war. And both sides are being hit, but we can't just say that, yeah, Ukraine is hitting this stuff, so it's going to bring Russia to its knees, when Russia has far more capacity and is doing the same thing to the Ukraine side. You have to have the whole calculation. You have to have the whole equation involved. You can't just say, I'm going to take this element and that element and then base a policy off of it, oblivious to the fact that you're just taking Ukraine down the slower path to death. That's just where we are. That's why I say, folks, our policies are irrational, they're illogical, and they're immoral. Because not only will they not win, they're virtually guaranteeing the destruction of Ukraine, as opposed to if President Trump used his leverage on Zelensky, which, by the way, was the one party he didn't even mention in that letter over the weekend. He didn't put any pressure on Zelensky at all, only on NATO and only in threats on Russia with sanctions, nothing on Ukraine. So he's not even using his leverage that he does have to bring this war to a conclusion. So the only thing we can calculate is that he doesn't really want to end the war. I mean, that's just the truth of it. The evidence is there. Forget about the words. You have to look at when the words and the actions don't line up. You have to dismiss the words and look at the actions. And the actions say that President Trump and the West and Zelensky don't want the war to end. The Russians don't either. Well, the Russians do. They actually would like it to end, but they will keep fighting unless they get their terms the way that they have outlined them, because they see there is a path to a military victory on the Russian side. And it is a rational one. It is a painful one. It is a costly one. And it is something that's going to take up a lot of time. But they can see a rational path to a military victory from their side. Don't believe those people who say there is no military solution to this war. There is. There is a rational military solution from the Russian side against our side. And right now we are oblivious to that, and we are setting ourselves up for a lot of trouble, even in addition to the bloodshed and the crushing losses that we're inflicting on our erstwhile ally of Ukraine. And Zelensky, of course, is just as much to blame on that as anybody else, because he also has leverage here and he has agency, and he's not playing any of that either. He's just oblivious, and we're going to keep going to the demise of his own countrymen. That's where we are on this day. Appreciate you guys being with us today. Continue to please be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't done that. That helps us out a lot more than you may know. Look forward to seeing you later this afternoon at 2 o'clock on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.